found yourself listening to a pastor or maybe watching one on YouTube and thinking, yeah, I hear you, but if you only knew? We're going to be talking about that in today's video. Hey guys, and welcome back to God's Word Made Simple by Simple Servant Ministries. My name is Aaron Hawk, and if this is your first time visiting with us, I just want to say welcome and thank you for joining us today. God's Word Made Simple is an online discipleship ministry dedicated to taking God's Word and making it simple. We want to help you understand God's Word, apply it to your life, and grow in your relationship with the Lord. And by the way, if you appreciate this content at some point, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn that bell notification to all so you don't miss any future videos. We would really love to have you as part of our family. Okay guys, welcome back. So today we are starting a new series. For right now it's 2 parts, but I already know it's going to be more than that. But for right now we'll just say 2 parts. And the series is going to be on things that congregations or church members wish that their pastors knew or understood. Sometimes when you're listening or watching a pastor, you might be thinking, you know, he's making great biblical points, but that doesn't apply or it doesn't work like that in the real world. Well, we're going to be talking about that in this series, and I put this up on Facebook not long ago, and by the way, there are 2 parts to this series. Well, I already said 2 parts to the video, but actually 2 separate series that go together. This one is what congregation members wish pastors understood. The other one is what pastors wish congregation members understood. So I'm going to go ahead and point, and I'll put a link up there. I don't think that one will be live when this video first goes live. I believe it'll be the following week, so next week from your perspective. So when you first watch this, that link won't be live, but it will later. But anyway, the goal of this series is to help bring understanding, because all of us as human beings tend to think from our perspective first. We are fundamentally selfish, whether we want to admit it or not. So it's easy when you're sitting in the congregation to go, you know, Pastor, I hear you, but it just doesn't work like that in the real world, and I wish you could just live in my shoes for one day. And then pastors, obviously, on the other side go, you know, I get you, I understand it's tough in the real world, but I wish that you understood things a little better from my perspective. So that's the goal, that's my heart behind this series. It's not for one side to wag fingers at the other, although I'm sure there will be some of that. But it really is, my goal really is just to help bring understanding to the 2 different perspectives on the Christian life. So today we're covering what congregation members wish that their pastors understood. And like I said, it's 2 parts already. I know it's going to be more than that because I put this up on Facebook not long ago asking people for their input. So what you need to understand about these videos, both the congregation ones and the pastor ones, is that these are people from all walks of life, all across the country, and from everything from small churches to big churches. I've been blessed to be kind of all over the country and make lots of friends in different areas, so I feel like it's a pretty good representation of a very large group called the Christian church. So that said, some of these may apply more or less in your life, but also just bear that in mind as we go through some of them. That may be why. The other thing I want to say before I get started, and I promise I'm getting started, the other thing I want to say is check down in the description. I'm going to put a link to our Facebook page. If you're not already a member of that page, please go ahead and join that page. That is an area where you can stay up to date. It is an area where I'm going to ask questions like this, like, hey, what are some things you'd like? So if you'd like to see some of your input in these videos, I'd love to have your input, because it doesn't do me any good to talk and not know what's connecting. But the only way I'm going to have that is through something like Facebook, or if you put it in the comments, of course. And then on Facebook, you can private message me as well. And, you know, for things like this, sometimes people aren't comfortable talking publicly. Anyway, I'm already a few minutes into this video, so let's get started. All right, so in no particular order, number 1 on the list, again, no particular order, just happens to be the first one. I wish pastors understood what it's like to work a normal job, and the person put that in air quotes, or actually in quotes, not air quotes. A normal job, there's my air quotes, and then volunteer. I wish pastors had a realistic expectation of volunteers. Don't be the ivory tower guy and think that it's just so easy to do everything a church wants you to do. And I feel that. You may or may not know this. Much of my time in ministry has been bivocational. So there have been seasons, and I remember what it was like before being in ministry too. I'm celebrating 20 years of ministry this year. But actually it'll be this coming December, so in a few weeks it'll be 20 years of ministry officially. But I remember what it was like before that too. But even in bivocational ministry, there have been seasons of life where I've been sitting on the pew helping out in other areas while working a full-time job, and there have been seasons during that bivocational ministry where I have been in the pulpit and doing both sides at the same time. Currently, I am in a full-time vocational position, but I remember what that's like is my point, and I think this is a common one because it's easy for pastors to become insulated, and I think this is something that sometimes churches create this problem because they have so many expectations of their pastor. The pastor literally can't leave the building other than to go visit someone for church purposes. And so I think a lot of times this is a self-created problem, the church and the staff just not communicating well. But it's also just part of what I referenced earlier. We're all just selfish, and we all just think from our own perspective. So it's very easy. Remember, pastors are human. It's very easy for these human pastors to go, well, you know, I'm here all the time, and I know it feels like that. I don't know any pastors that would say that. I've never met a pastor, I've never met a pastor that would actually logically say or think, well, I'm here all the time, so everybody else should be. But I do know that a lot of times in church it can come across that way. And I think it's just because pastors do forget over time because they are already there. What is picking up one more thing? What is, yet another meeting? Now, you need to meet if you're part of a committee or a group that does stuff, but try to make sure those meeting times are streamlined, efficient, and not more than what is necessary to do the work. I don't know how many times I've been in meetings, both as a layperson and as a pastor, and conversation just goes in circles, and you're like, oh my goodness, we've wasted so much time. Allow the leaders to lead so that those things can be more efficient, and if the leader doesn't have the ability to do that, maybe encourage them to do so. But yeah, it is tough to work a full-time job plus. I mean, there are very few jobs that are just 40 hours anymore. So work a full-time job plus and have a family and still come to do all the things that you want to do, as well as the things that just are needs in the church that maybe other people aren't stepping up to do. And then you're like, well, nobody else is stepping up. Technically, I can do this, but then you end up on that path to burnout. There's an old saying in the percentages, of course, the joke, 95% of statistics are made up. Well, if you don't, you've heard it now. Think about that for a second. It'll hit you if you've not heard that one before. But there's the old saying in the church world that 10% of the people do 90% of the work, and sadly, it's often true. And so it can feel even more like this when you're sitting on a pew. So what you need to do, in my opinion, if you want to work on this, is remind your pastor of that in a loving way. You can send them an encouraging note and then just say, hey, one thing I've been praying about is it feels like it's hard to keep up, and then just explain, I work this many hours, etc. And if you want to be super Southern about it, you can just say, please pray for me as I sort through this. Because, in the South, we can't just say, hey, here's a problem. I wish we could. But, whatever the case, just find a way to communicate that. It's honestly probably better in a conversation with your pastor, and, just reminding them, if you feel like this is a problem, just reminding them, hey, look, I want to volunteer in this, but I have this, and I have this, and I have this. And honestly, that's the best way to do it, is if a pastor or someone on staff is approaching you about helping out in an area, just say, look, I don't feel that I can take on more right now, assuming that's the case, because I'm doing this and this, and I work, these are, roughly my hours, so, hey, I don't even get home until 6:30, I cram food in my kids' throats, and we're running to church, and, 7 o'clock, then it's 8:30 before we get home, maybe 9, and the kids are tired, and the next day they're cranky. Like, just remind pastors of that. I promise you, pastors that still have children will understand that more than you think they will. And the others might have grands or just need that reminder. And it may simply be miscommunication too. It may be that the pastor doesn't realize that what they're saying is coming across that way, and they just need to be lovingly reminded by nature of you sharing with them, hey, I feel this need, but I also don't think that I can do more, and here's why. So that would be a suggestion to help with that. And pastors, if you're listening to that, or if you're listening to this video, I would encourage you to be very careful with the way that you do present things to your congregation so that it doesn't come across that way. All right, number next, as one of my martial arts instructors loves to say, number 2 on our list, what it's like to witness in the real world. And you notice this pattern developing. I notice this in the responses that I've received, and I adopt this language all the time anyway. But what it's like to witness in the real world. There's a difference between the bubble that is the church. If you're in a good church, to a degree it should feel like a safe place, to borrow the modern language. But it shouldn't be so disconnected that it doesn't know how to connect with the rest of the world, the real world. But anyway, what it's like to witness in the real world. It's not as easy as simply repeat the Roman road, and not all jobs are equal. And that's very true. Various jobs that I've been in, I've had a lot of jobs over the years. It's not easy in various jobs. Some of them are very open to you communicating with each other and sharing things. Some are very closed, and you do need to be careful there. And of course, there's always the concern, okay, am I honoring God or people? But you have to have a job to live. Jesus talked about that. For example, not relating to this, but an indirect application when he talked about your ox being a ditch working on the Sabbath, right? Anyway, let me finish reading this and then I'll comment. Some jobs you aren't allowed to witness in the traditional sense, and some jobs sharing your faith in the typical way may cost people their lives. Specifically, this one is someone that is, I'm trying to figure out how to word this to protect anonymity. Let me just say this. For anyone that is a first responder or in the medical field, this one is very potentially an issue. So let me read this and then I'll comment after. Sharing your faith in the typical way, and they put that in quotes too, may cost people their lives. In other words, isolating coworkers, you need to maintain good relationships with coworkers, etc., etc. So here's the thing, it shouldn't be this way, right? In a professional environment, whether first responder, medical, whatever, it ought to be that whatever your personal stuff is just that, it's personal. You may not like the person next to you, but when somebody's life is in trouble in front of you, you jump in, all hands on deck, 100% effort. It ought to be that way. But the reality is that oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes in a medical or first responder scenario, and there are plenty of other jobs that are like this, I'm just using that to describe it because I think it's easy for people to understand and also relevant to the person that submitted this particular one. If your coworkers don't like you, they are less likely to come to your aid. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be that they are putting the patient or the person that's having the emergency first. It ought to be that they're coming to their aid. But the reality is, when you're in those jobs, it's usually that you're helping your brother or sister in arms, so to speak. And obviously I'm using more first responder than medical language there. I understand the first responder realm much better. I have assisted with police for many, many years over the years doing trainings and other things. So I just understand that realm a lot better. But anyway, it should be, in a perfect world, I'm repeating myself, but in a perfect world, it ought to be that person's in trouble, all hands on deck, I'm here to help that person. But what it typically turns into is, I'm there to help my brother in arms solve a situation, and that situation is that person needs help. So in that context, I agree with this person, it can get sticky. Now, sometimes you can overthink this stuff too, but it can get sticky because if you're in trouble and you need help to solve a situation, whether it's an emergency, a medical situation, whatever, and the other person doesn't like you, they're less likely to respond quickly and probably less likely to give 100% effort. And when people don't respond quickly as humanly possible, and don't respond with 100% effort, that's where lives are lost that could have been saved. Sometimes lives are lost and there's nothing you can do about that. But I think this person has a very valid point that you do need to be careful of those dynamics. Now, you can overthink that, but you do need to be careful of those dynamics. So I think it's very important, and I'll share, one from my own experience. I worked at the Dana Corporation for a little while I was in school. It was just like a winter break job as a temp employee. It wasn't full-time or anything. But at that job, I already knew it was union controlled and it was, an industrial type job. So I already knew that I'm not going to witness in the typical way there. I wasn't going to go in the break room and start, preaching Jesus. I wasn't going to ask all my coworkers the, Roman road type questions or the evangelism explosion questions right off the bat anyway, right? In contexts like that, I believe in lifestyle evangelism. I think you take the opportunities that God gives you, but I think that you build the relationship first. And I think you see that modeled throughout the New Testament. Most of the time, when people were witnessing in what we would call the traditional way, that was usually in a public format, like Paul at the Areopagus in Acts, is it 17? We'll put the reference down here. But that's usually where you see people doing like the equivalent of street preaching. And hey, if you want to do street preaching, more power to you. I question the effectiveness of it in the modern day, but maybe that's just my bias because I'm not wired that way. Ironically, you would think that I am. But I am much more of a build a relationship type of person. So when I worked at the drive shaft factory, that was the factory that I worked at for Dana Corporation, I didn't really force those conversations. I talked with people, I interacted with them, I purposely got to know them because I love them because Christ loves me. So my motivation was just get to know them because I love them, because not in the salvific sense, but in the sense that they are created by God, they are God's children in that sense. And some of you will have a cow at that, that's fine, we can talk about that in another video. If you'd like me to, put that down in the comments. But I built relationships with people, and then on break, usually during lunch, everybody was kind of preoccupied, so I always had my Bible with me, my physical Bible. I'm okay doing the digital Bible, but I find that all the notifications popping up distract me, so I still typically use a physical Bible. So I would have my Bible with me, and I would just open it up during the break, and I would read and eat, and I was just in my own little world. I really wasn't doing that to be a witness. That was not my purpose in reading my Bible during the lunch break. But it's an hour. I'm the kind of guy that when I'm working, I cram food down while I'm doing something else and then just keep going. Used to drive my helpers nuts with that, doing electrical work. I didn't take breaks. But anyway, at this one, it was union, industrial. You had to take a break, and it was an hour. Well, what am I going to do twiddling my thumbs for an hour? You may not realize how high energy I am, but I'm very high energy, even as heavy as I am. And I was in really good shape then. So even more so, think Twitchy, or what was the squirrel's name on Over the Hedge? I can't remember. Hammy, right? Think those characters. That's me naturally and especially in shape. Anyway, I'm spending way too much time on this. Hopefully you appreciate these anecdotes. Let me know that in the comment as well. I feel like this helps flesh it out, but also don't want to bore you and make you click off the video. But that ended up being a ministry opportunity because people started asking me questions about the Bible. Hey, I've always wondered, you read the Bible, I've always wondered, and then they'd ask me a question. And then one guy in particular that was there was a very vocal person. At first, he was doing it in an antagonistic way, picking on me, but then when I actually had answers to his questions, he started asking me real deep questions. I don't know that anybody there got saved, but I know that it was a faithful witness. I think that's how witnessing should happen in the real world in most cases. But I think a lot of times the way that it comes across in a sermon or in a teaching, and I think some pastors don't even understand that. I think they've been so much in the ivory tower mindset, they don't understand that and they need to be reminded. So hey, show them this video and show them the other one as well that'll be coming out next week. But I think also it's often just the way that it comes across. It is very difficult in a sermon to communicate adequately. Here's what you need to understand to witness, but here's a decent approach. I've probably spent 5 minutes talking about this. That's an eternity in attention span, right? I mean, people have probably already clicked off of this video. In fact, if you have not, put "I'm still here" down in the comments. I'm curious how many of you will do that. All right, number 3 for today's list. Again, no particular order. This one is dear to my heart, and it also breaks my heart at the same time. Again, for anonymity, I'm not going to share anything about who this was, but let me tell you, this is somebody that I highly, highly respect. And this is somebody who is technically a layperson. I consider this person more of a mentor, but this is somebody that is technically a layperson that has been in church for a very long time and is a very mature Christian. So this one breaks my heart, and you'll understand why in a moment, but I think he's right. Well, I know he is. I'm trying to be polite, but I know he's right. I wish that more pastors understood their job. And a lot of people go, amen, but you don't really understand what a pastor's job is either. That's another problem, but that would be a different video for a different day. Let me know if you'd like me to cover that in another video, in a separate video, and I'll be happy to do that. I wish that more pastors understood their job, as in the role of shepherd and overseer. And you may not be aware, but it's fine if you're not. The word pastor, shepherd, overseer, elder in the New Testament are interchangeable. It's usually the exact same Greek word. Not always, but anyway, I'm not getting into that today, but it's usually the same word. So pastor, shepherd, overseer, elder, typically the same word. Pastors have a watch care responsibility. Now, watch care, I don't know that that's a word that most people use in the modern day, but if you're not familiar with that word, it's a beautiful word that summarizes a lot. It's the idea of the shepherd watching over the sheep. You are to watch, meaning protect, and care, meaning provide. So you are both protecting and providing for the sheep. That's what a shepherd does. So pastors have a watch care responsibility that is typically not lived out. And I think that's especially true in modern America. So many churches, their concept of, and I guess I got to get into this a little bit. So many churches, their concept of a pastor, and I think unfortunately therefore a lot of pastors' concept of a pastor's job is you show up and you preach, and then you go visit people here and there, and that's your job. That's not how the New Testament defines a pastor's job. Watch, care, and shepherd, meaning they are the leader, but they also have responsibilities that go beyond simply preaching and visiting. A part of that is accountability, but I'll keep reading. I wish that more pastors understood their job and how to actually care for and pursue the sheep and their role as an overseer and being responsible for their soul. Right? Just like in a corporate setting, a manager is ultimately responsible for the people underneath of that manager. So when corporate comes calling, they're not asking the low-level person, hey, why didn't you show up for work? They're asking the manager, hey, why aren't your employees showing up for work? Right? They are responsible for those under them. Well, it's the same with God and a pastor and the congregation. God is going to come to the pastor first. Now, you have personal responsibility directly to God. That's where it's different. Well, it's not exactly different, but it is different in a different sense. Anyway, I don't know if that makes sense or not. It's not a perfect analogy. But in the church, you have a direct responsibility to God, but your pastor also has that responsibility before God. So he's going to answer for how well he pastors you. In 30 or 40 years of being involved in church, 30 to 40 years of being involved in church, this person has never had a pastor. Sorry, it took me a second because I had to anonymize that. In 30 or 40 years of being involved in church, this person has never had a pastor ask questions like, how is your walk? How is your spiritual walk? What is your prayer life like? What are you reading? What are you learning in your quiet time? Are you free from pornography on all your devices? And other such things that I would consider basic accountability questions. He said he has never once been asked that by a pastor, and he wishes that more pastors understood that they will answer for their watch care, and that this is beyond simple personality, because some pastors will go, well, I'm just a more timid person or whatever, so he's answering that objection. This goes beyond simple personality or preference, but to the core of what it means to be a pastor, and I would say amen to that. And, you know, I think a lot of people I think a lot of church members probably don't realize that that's supposed to be the relationship of the pastor to the congregation. So I'm not sure how many people would put this on their list, But as you grow in maturity in the New Testament, especially, but Old Testament included, as you grow in maturity in your faith and your understanding of the Old and New Testament, I should have worded it that way, then you will begin to understand how important that watch care is, and then you'll start looking around and going, yeah. I'll share a personal story. When I first felt called to ministry, and when I say that, when I first started understanding the call to ministry that was on my life, I approached our pastor at the time. He met with me for lunch, which was good, and he handed me a workbook and said, okay, well, I would do this workbook and that should answer a bunch of your questions. And that was it. And I asked him in the same meeting, I was like, well, do you want this back when I'm finished? Like, in my mind, I'd been reading the Bible for years at that point. I was young. I think I was in 8th grade at the time. Yeah, I was in 8th grade at the time. But still, I'd been reading the Bible for years at that point. And I'm like, do you want this back? Like, I didn't know how to articulate, is there no discipleship or accountability? I didn't know how to articulate that at the time, but that's what I was asking. And he was like, yeah, that'd probably be good. Like, like the commercials, should have had a V8, doink. Unfortunately, a lot of pastors, that's the case. And I'll be honest, being a vocational pastor, it's hard not to fall into that trap, because oftentimes what's communicated from the church to the pastor is, you're up there in the pulpit, you do the meetings over there, and I'm just going to show up and do what I do, and never the twain shall meet, as the old saying goes. But that's not what pastors are called to do. So I'm going to challenge pastors that are listening to this, be the shepherd. But I'm also going to challenge the congregation, allow the pastor to be the shepherd. You should be engaging the shepherd as well. Sheep don't purely ignore a shepherd, using that analogy. They usually come to them and so on, and the pastor comes to the sheep. It's a two-way relationship. The pastor has more responsibility, so it ultimately lands on him, but it is a two-way street. So I want to encourage you as a congregation member to encourage your pastor along these lines, and to be available and to ask questions. And again, pastors, I'm going to exhort you to be the shepherd. And I know that's really hard right now because this video is being recorded during the coronavirus pandemic. Currently, we're at what is probably the beginning or the middle of the Delta variant. So who knows in 20 years, what that'll look like from a historical perspective. But it has been very difficult to do that over the last year or two, because many things have been virtual. And, even from my perspective, in a church that I'm in, where people are pretty close to each other, people are scared to meet, and it's understandable, at least to a degree. It's very hard to make those personal connections, but it's not impossible, and it doesn't absolve you of your responsibility to try. That's really all that we can do. And then ultimately, if we've done our best, we leave it up to God. All right, next up, number 4, don't shame people who struggle with anxiety or depression. And I think that that's another one that is really important. I think that this is something that is too common. It's much more common than it should be, i.e. way too common. I don't think most pastors mean to, but I think that it does happen. And there is a balance between allowing people to be human and understanding the faith that should be there in Christ. In a perfect world, sunshine, moonbeams, and rainbows and unicorns, in a perfect world, our faith would be so sure that there would be no room for anxiety and all these other emotions that bring us down, because we'd be so living in God's presence that those things just wouldn't have any place. And I know some of you will shoot back, yeah, but we also live in a world where the physical realm is affected by sin, and therefore there's mental illness and depression and things that come from physical causes. Absolutely, I agree with you. What I'm saying is, in that perfect unicorns and sunshine and moonbeams and all that rainbow stuff, that stuff wouldn't happen either. So by having that small objection, you're actually agreeing with me and I'm agreeing with you. See what I did there? But we don't live in a perfect world, and that's the point that I was trying to get to. We don't live in a perfect world, and we do live in a world that is affected by sin. Both the spiritual and the physical realm have been affected by sin. If you haven't caught it before, catch my Genesis series. Start in chapter 1, at least go chapters 1 through 3, and you'll at some level understand what I just referred to. And you could watch those videos fairly quickly, just binge watch. I think probably about an hour worth of binge watching. You'd have all 3 of those videos, probably less than that, I don't remember, but you can let me know in the comments if you want. But anyway, my point is that yes, we live in a world that has been corrupted and affected by sin. So there are some physical things that cause depression, anxiety, and so on. We also live in a society that likes to make excuses for people just not growing up and having emotional and mental maturity. And where that balance is, that's for a counselor to help figure out. Preferably a truly Christian counselor. By the way, not everyone that quotes a Bible verse or says a prayer in a counseling session is a Christian counselor. Different video, different day. But a truly Christian counselor will help you sort through, okay, what are likely some of the physical things that may be causing this, and what are some things that are just you need to grow and mature and then help you do so. Because it's a both. It's not an either or, and too many people try to make it an either or. It's not. It's a both. There are legitimate physical causes, and there are spiritual and emotional causes where sometimes we just need to mature, and that's why we're struggling in the way that we are. Again, a good Christian counselor can help you sort through that. If you want some recommendations, I can try to make some recommendations, but I'll be honest with you, it's hard to make recommendations just based on a certification or an affiliation with a particular group. I know people in various groups that would officially disagree with each other that are great counselors, and in a counseling room would actually agree with each other. So it gets a little tricky, but I can try to help. But back to the main point. I think that I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to pastors. Sometimes they are just being jerks, but I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt. I think oftentimes pastors in their preaching come across as if you struggle with anxiety or depression, you just lack faith and you're just not Christian enough or mature enough, and so on and so on. Like I said a minute ago, that may be true, it may be something else, and it's probably both. But that alone is oversimplifying the problem. And I think sometimes that's done because pastors don't have the maturity to deal with or understand that. Many times they don't have the education to understand it either. They just read the Bible, A plus B equals C in their mind, and they really have never dealt with counseling and the real world. Again, it's the ivory tower versus the real world scenario. I'm blessed to have been able to be in both worlds. I'm blessed that I have a master's in counseling. My undergrad was in theology, and I'm prayerfully thinking about pursuing a D-Min. Not demon, there's plenty of those running around too, but a D-Min, a doctorate of ministry. So that's something you can pray for me about if you think to and want to. But I'm blessed to be able to have experience in each of those realms. And I think because of that, I'm able to understand a little bit better maybe than people that have not had that benefit. But I want to encourage you as pastors, and myself included, be careful as you speak in your sermons that you're not shaming. And this isn't just the ultra modern, the millennial joke about everything is shaming. No, I think there's genuine validity to this, because I think oftentimes, again, I'll give the benefit of the doubt that it's unintentional, but I think oftentimes it's communicated that if you just had enough faith, all your problems would go away. Well, yeah, if Jesus Christ returned right now, or if Adam and Eve never sinned and we lived in a perfect world, we would have sinned too, by the way. Again, check out the Genesis series. But in other words, if the world was truly perfect, sure, that's true. But it's not a perfect world, and therefore it's more complicated than a simple just have faith. Okay. The last one, and this one is a shorter one, but a very important one, greeting time. This is a controversial one, right? Some people love greeting time, some people hate greeting time, but this person wrote in, greeting time, meaning hugging, shaking hands, etc. And let's put aside the coronavirus issues for right now. Again, I'm recording in kind of the midst of the pandemic. Technically, the main pandemic is over-ish, but now we're dealing with a Delta variant. Honestly, it feels like the same thing for the last year and a half to 2 years. So let's put that to the side and talk about normal times. Hugging, shaking hands, etc. is terrifying for introverts and so on. And I would say oftentimes for people that are new to the church as well. See, there's a hard balance to strike there between making people that are visiting and people that are long-term members or visitors or whatever. But let's just say people that are visiting for the first few times, it's hard to know how to minister to them and make them feel welcome without making them feel overwhelmed or awkward. But, you know, I agree that to a large degree, the whole shaking hands thing probably needs to go away. I know a lot of churches that still do it, and I know a lot of churches that probably the majority appreciate it. But I think even aside from the coronavirus, I think that's something that probably needs to go away. And I think what should happen, and again, we're talking ideal, it's hard to do this in real life, I get it, I'm talking to the pastors right now, but I think what we ought to do is have some way of facilitating fellowship before and after the service. So that means structuring our schedule, whether we have multiple services or not, structuring our schedule so that there is time before the service for people to mingle, and structuring it so that after the service there is time to mingle and fellowship as well. One of the favorite churches that I was in, I'm not going to name names because I don't know if it's still that way or not, but they had about 15 minutes between each service, and I know many churches that do that. But they would usually, you know, somehow facilitate a little bit of fellowship. And sometimes it was a cheesy joke, like ask people what's their favorite color or whatever. You could overdo that kind of stuff, but reminding people that this is your time to fellowship and interact, but also from a church administrative perspective, have a hit squad. And no, I don't mean that in the sense of like, you know, snipers and assassins and things like that. But what I mean is have a properly functioning greeting team that knows who is usually there and who is not, so that they can specifically seek out the people that are new. And I think another thing that's good, it can be overdone, and I've heard people speak against this as being flashy or materialistic, but I think it's a good touch point. Some churches have a small gift basket or a small gift for first-time visitors. Instead of the old days, you know, hey, first-time visitors, fill out this card and drop it in the basket. People don't really like doing that. They have been surveyed to death in the modern world. I think instead, having somewhere set up where you have an attendant, where it's a small gift. That way during the service you can say, and by the way, if this is your first time visiting with us, we have a small gift that we'd love to give you. I mean, some churches it's literally just a mug and a couple, like, you know, maybe a little espresso mix or something. But it's something as a touch point so that introverts or people that are just nervous being in a church, maybe they would feel more comfortable coming up and talking to somebody, and then that person is also kind of a specialist in welcoming someone that's new. I think that's probably a lot more healthy than, you know, greet your neighbor and, you know, the hit list of the new thing being dropped in the offering plate. So anyway, just my thoughts, but I think that's also valid. And you know, it's not easy to those of you that are listening that are just church members and not on the administrative side. It's not easy to hold the balance as a pastor administrator on some of these things. So again, please lovingly give your pastor this sort of feedback. One thing I would say, not on Sunday morning. You have no idea how many micro conversations pastors have on a Sunday morning. It is almost impossible, and in some churches it is impossible for the pastor to keep up with all of it. So have your touch base points with your pastor. Hey, pastor, remember I asked that question? Have you had a chance? That's fine. But this kind of stuff, either set up a separate meeting or call or send them a loving email or something like that. I don't like email personally, but in some churches that's just what you're going to need to do, or because your work schedule doesn't allow, and so on. But anyway, I think these are 5 great points, and I'm looking forward to next week's video. So I'll go ahead and point now for next week's video, or sorry, 2 weeks from now and next week's. So actually the one for next week's video, the card probably already went up there. So just a moment ago would be the card for 2 weeks from now, the next one where the congregation's perspective is being shared. I'm looking forward to this series, and again, I'm hoping that this is something that will help build up and not tear down. All right, guys, I know this has been a long video, and if you are still hanging in there, I want you to put down in the comments, even if you commented earlier, I want you to put in the comments, hanging in there. And thank you guys very much, not only because I want people to understand this material, but it also helps the channel when people watch the whole video, so thank you very much. If you have anything, like I said before, put it in the comments, get us on the Facebook group, let me know some of your thoughts so that I can do a follow-up video to these later on. All right, guys, that's it for today. As always, thank you very much. You know what to do. Hit like, subscribe, smash that bell icon to all, hit share, all that stuff. You know what to do. Guys, thank you very much, and God bless.